In the days long after the War of the Ring had been decided, when bards sang freely of the struggles of that age, there emerged another tale, hidden in the hush of unspoken sorrow and caught in the uncertain glimmer of memory. Few are those who can say they witnessed every subtle turn of fate, for in wars of men and conflicts that shape the world, paths diverge easily. Some believe that love, like a stream, follows a chosen course, unwavering in its watery bed. But there are also quiet rumors that love's current can shift, forging an entirely new channel and changing the land around it. And so we speak of a moment when the hearts of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and Éowyn of Rohan might have been entwined in a bond far different than the one the world remembers. Whether this was mere fancy or a fleeting possibility woven into the tapestry of the Third Age, the tale stands as a testament to the fragility of the mortal heart and the mysteries of destiny. In that telling, the even star of the elves did not reign supreme over the ranger's heart, and the White Lady of Rohan saw her courage rewarded by a love she scarcely dared to hope for. It began in the quiet moments before the war truly roared across the plains, back in the days when Aragorn was yet known widely as Strider, and Éowyn stood in the golden hall of Meduseld, eyes bright and keen as a blade. Word reached the northlands of Rohan's distress and the shadow gathering in the east. Soon enough, signs of orcs raiding near the borders prompted Aragorn and his companions, Legolas the elf, Gimli the dwarf, and the wizard Gandalf, to ride with all haste toward the Riddermark. Their mission was to gather allies where they could, for Sauron's darkness was stretching its claws toward every free kingdom. Meduseld was not as yet wholly under the sway of Grima Wormtongue, but the snake had begun to coil, dripping poison in King Theoden's ear. Times were tense and hearts burdened by sorrow. Even so, hope lingered. Éowyn would often stand upon the steps of the Golden Hall to stare at the horizon, her eyes searching for even the faintest glimmer of deliverance. When at last Gandalf and Aragorn arrived in Edoras, she felt a stirring within her, some intangible sense that fate had knocked upon the door. It was not at first the stirring of love, but of longing for the open air, for riding unburdened by fear, for the kind of heroic deeds she had learned of in old sagas. Yet when she first beheld Aragorn, cloaked in the humility of a ranger but bearing the quiet majesty of his long forefathers, she found her gaze lingering upon him. In that same moment, Aragorn sensed in her a spirit that shone like a sword blade newly drawn, sharp, resolute, reflecting a fierce resilience and a yearning for freedom. He recognized in her something that resonated with his own wanderer's heart. The days that followed were darker. Gandalf healed Theoden of the lingering shadows cast by Wormtongue, but war still pressed upon them. Forced to ride westward to Helm's Deep, they took with them the people of Edoras, the women and children and older men who could not fight. Éowyn stood forth in shining mail, resolute to guard her people, though her heart chafed against the role of caretaker when she longed to be sword sister to the mighty. Aragorn recognized in her that quiet ache. He had seen it in himself over the many years of his wandering, longing for a place to stand, a rightful name and crown to bear, yet always cloaked and hidden from the world. Whenever their eyes met, there was a mutual understanding that passed between them. Two spirits forged in the fires of duty, yet each bound by burdens they had not chosen. There was an eve before the departure to Helm's Deep when the sun fled in a blaze of gold behind the hills, and the banners of Rohan drooped listlessly in the windless air. Éowyn, restless, walked alone among the wooden houses near the stables, her mind churning with fears for her king, for her brother Éomer, and for the men who would soon face battle. Strider Aragorn came upon her quite by chance. She stood with her back turned, stroking the muzzle of a horse that nickered softly, as though in comfort. Soft words passed between them, quiet at first, for the hush of the moment gave them space to lay bare their feelings without the clamor of the hall. "Lady Éowyn," he murmured, his voice as gentle as a night breeze. She turned. The fading light caught the golden strands of her hair and made them glow softly against the twilight. "You are well named Strider," she replied in a low voice, not mocking but thoughtful. "I have seen how you walk these halls, like a man searching for something just beyond the edge of sight. Or perhaps it is an escape you seek." A wry smile curved Aragorn's lips. "I think you know well what I seek, to protect those in need, to fight in the name of that which must not be lost. And yet there is more. Something in the west calls to me, a duty I have long carried upon my shoulders. She did not look away, and her voice grew firmer. I too carry a burden, though of a different nature. I wish to ride out with the men, to stand in defense of the kingdom. My uncle forbids it, yet every fiber of my being demands that I take up sword and shield, not just the ledger of a caretaker. Aragorn paused, uncertain if he should speak. He recalled the solemn vow he'd made to himself and to Arwen, the elf maiden who had pledged her heart to him. But it was as though a breeze unsettled him. In that hush, he found himself speaking words meant to comfort her, words that perhaps hinted at something deeper than either of them understood. Courage is no less because it is caged, he said. It might be all the fiercer for it, but you must do what you believe is right, for I see that no less will content your spirit. She looked at him with eyes that glistened in the gloaming. And what of your spirit, Aragorn? What does it cry for, in the darkness of all that is to come? He had no ready answer then, and perhaps that was the beginning of the quiet shift. He knew the ties that bound him to Arwen, the Evenstar, far away in Rivendell. He had measured the years by the thought of her, by the memory of her grace beneath the Malorn trees of Lothlorien. Yet, in this moment, he found his heart responding in an unexpected way to Éowyn's presence. She was mortal like him. She was fierce, noble, and seemed carved out of the living stone of Rohan's mountains. Her sorrow and longing resonated with his own. Even so, he answered only with silence, and she nodded gravely. Under the gathering dark, they parted, each weighed by thoughts that had never before been stirred. When the time came to ride out, the war demanded every ounce of strength. Over the course of Helm's Deep, the roaring of orcs, the thunder of battering rams, and the stench of war filled the night. Aragorn fought with unwavering resolve, calling upon the men of Rohan to stand firm. Éomer flung himself into the thick of battle, while Éowyn remained behind in the caverns, forced to protect those who could not wield a blade. At the break of day, when Gandalf came with reinforcements and the tide turned at last, all hearts rejoiced in the moment of victory. Yet it was victory bought with blood. The sun rose over a field littered with the slain. Éowyn, stepping forth from the refuge of the caves, found her eyes immediately searching for Aragorn among the living. Relief overtook her when she saw him standing proud, blade still in hand, though battered by the fray. They did not speak then, for there was the work of the aftermath to tend to. The fallen needed burial, the wounded care. Yet in the days that followed, as the men of Rohan prepared to ride to Isengard, a new closeness sprouted between Éowyn and Aragorn, nurtured in sorrow and respect. She saw him not only as a kingly figure from the north, but as a man weighed by sorrow and hope in equal measure. And for him, Éowyn embodied the courageous spirit of men, a passion for life that burned with white heat, unclouded by the immortal perspective of elves. He admired how her eyes flashed with determination despite the burdens that weighed upon her. She was, in many ways, free of the doom that shadowed his own heart and lineage, or so he believed. Gandalf soon led Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas to Isengard to deal with Saruman, and Éowyn remained behind to watch over the fortress, to see to the healing of Rohan's wounds. Letters and messages passed between Edora's and Aragorn's company, but they were official, bearing tidings of war and counsel rather than personal notes. Yet in the quiet hours of the evening, Aragorn found himself recalling Éowyn's countenance and the gentle plea in her eyes that had asked, without words, for understanding. And Éowyn, pacing the halls of Meduseld, found that her hand would sometimes drift to her breast, where she swore she could still feel the faint warmth of his presence. Then came the summons to Gondor, the beacons lit across the mountain passes, calling Rohan's aid to Minas Tirith. When Theoden declared that the Rohirrim would ride, Éowyn was commanded again to remain. The memory of Helm's Deep, of the lesser role she'd been forced to play, fueled her frustration. How could she stand idle while her king and her brother went into mortal peril? She was a shield maiden of Rohan. Her hands, though slender, were strong, and her heart was that of a warrior. Upon hearing that Aragorn would also ride, and that he would take the paths of the dead to call upon the Oathbreakers, her resolve crystallized. She would not be left behind in the Golden Hall to wait and wonder. When Aragorn departed from Dunharrow to tread that dreadful path, Éowyn disguised herself not as a caretaker, but later, when riding with Theoden as one of the riders. As the host of Rohan galloped across the fields, she kept her identity secret, along with Merry the Hobbit who rode at her side. Yet in her heart, there was a swirling tempest of fear and longing. Fear for Rohan, for Aragorn, and for all free peoples. Longing for the day she might stand beside him, blade raised, in open defiance of the shadow that threatened to swallow them whole. In that alternate turning of events, let us say that Aragorn, upon emerging from the paths of the dead and leading the newly enlisted army of the dead to victory at Pelargir, felt a force pulling him not just toward Minas Tirith and duty, but also toward someone who awaited him there, someone who had defied all constraints to do her part in this war. He knew Arwen was far away, safe in Rivendell or perhaps in Lorien, her fate bound to his but distant from these immediate battles. And in the swirling chaos of prophecy and mortal struggle, the mortal presence of Éowyn drew him like a beacon. The hush of that vow he had with Arwen pressed upon him, yet for the first time in long years, he found his conviction uncertain. War has a way of bearing the truth of hearts to the blazing light of necessity. Sometimes, it unravels the tapestry we believed unbreakable. When the Battle of the Pelennor Fields was joined, war cries rend the air and spears splintered on shields. Mighty Mumakil trampled across the fields, orcs shrieked, and men fought with the desperation of those who know the fate of their world hangs by a thread. King Theoden led his riders in that glorious charge that shook the earth. Too soon, he fell beneath the weight of the Witch King's foul beast. Then Éowyn, discarding her helm, stood defiantly between the Witch King of Angmar and her dying king. Merry aided her, striking the creature with a well-placed blow that gave Éowyn the chance to drive her blade between crown and mantle, a deed no man could have accomplished. The Witch King's shriek pierced the heavens before he collapsed into a heap of nothingness. At that moment, Éowyn's valor shone as bright as day. Yet even as she dealt the death blow, the black serpent of the fell beast tore at her, and she collapsed in a swoon of lethal cold, the tendrils of the Morgul curse creeping through her. It was at that instant that Aragorn came onto the battlefield, leading the men of the south who had answered the call. He saw her fall and his heart nearly stopped. Battle fury burned in him, and he pressed forward, slashing and hacking until the orcs quavered before his righteous wrath. The field was won by the blood of thousands, but when Aragorn sank to his knees beside Éowyn's pale form, he felt the weight of the world shift. Here was the White Lady of Rohan, undone by the darkest sorcery. He refused to accept her downfall. With haste and trembling hands, he carried Éowyn to the Houses of Healing. There, under the care of Ioreth and Gandalf's counsel, he set about the tasks he had learned from Elrond in his youth. He summoned Athelas, the healing herb known to the elves as Kingsfoil, and as he crushed its leaves, a fresh fragrance spread through the room. Bending low, he placed one hand on Éowyn's brow, the other pressed to her heart, and called her name as if summoning her from the threshold of shadow. With each softly whispered word, he poured out his own strength. All the guilt he felt for not being there to shield her from harm, all the tumult in his soul that yearned for her to return. These feelings surged like a flood through him. Whether it was the rightful gift of a king or the raw power of human love, Éowyn's eyelids fluttered, and color returned to her cheeks. She inhaled a ragged breath. "Aragorn," she whispered, the ghost of a smile upon her lips. He bent near, relief shining in his eyes, and he felt an overwhelming sense of closeness to her. A bond forged not merely in arms but in unspoken devotion. "You are safe now, Éowyn," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Your deed was beyond what any man could have accomplished. You have slain the Witch King." She reached out and he clasped her hand, noticing how small it felt in his. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were bound by more than victory, more than duty. But the war was not yet done. Sauron still brooded in Mordor, and the fate of the world still hung in the balance. Aragorn lingered but a moment longer before his responsibilities pulled him away. Yet his heart remained there in the quiet hush of the houses of healing, where Éowyn now lay recovering. As the city of Minas Tirith mourned its dead and prepared for the final stand, Éowyn slowly returned to her strength. Under the watchful gaze of the healers, she regained the will to fight and live. Aragorn, now recognized as the King Elisar, bore the weight of command, and he wrestled with a growing realization that his vow to Arwen, once the cornerstone of his being, had grown fragile in the face of a new love. It weighed upon him like a mantle of guilt, and yet he found it impossible to deny the flame that had ignited between him and Éowyn. Duty, love, prophecy, hope, they twisted together, forming knots in his heart. When at last the captains of the West decided to march upon the Black Gate, to draw Sauron's eye away from the ring-bearer and give Frodo a chance to cast the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom, Éowyn emerged from the houses of healing in defiance of all counsel that she remain. The men insisted she was not fully healed, that her arm still bore the black bruise of the Witch King's deadly chill. Yet Éowyn refused to be left behind. She confronted Aragorn in a small courtyard near the citadel, where a stunted white tree struggled to bloom again after long neglect. The hush of the city night was broken only by their murmured voices. "You ride forth again, though in all likelihood you go to death," she said, her tone measured, but her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "I cannot wait here, bound by dressings and potions, while you and my brother and every noble heart faces peril at the gates of Mordor. Let me ride, if only to stand at your side once more." "Éowyn," he replied in a murmur barely above a whisper, "my heart bids me keep you safe, but I know you cannot be caged, and you have earned your place among those who fight. Yet I am torn. Should I be so selfish as to risk the death of the one who—" He hesitated, voice faltering. "Who what?" She pressed gently, stepping nearer. He took a breath, and in the dim starlight, he looked upon her as if seeing her anew. "The one who my heart clings to is hope," he finished at last, voice thick with honesty. "I cannot deny it any longer. I should have done so, for I am promised elsewhere. But love is not a thing so easily governed." She reached for his hand. "If this be our last battle, let us meet it with open hearts, unafraid to cherish what little time may remain to us." No more words were spoken. In the starlit courtyard, with the city's lamplights glinting off white stone, they embraced, their foreheads touching, as though each drew strength from the other. The thought of Arwen, fair, steadfast, long-suffering, hung at the back of Aragorn's mind like a guilty shadow. Yet at this juncture, with doom looming, his mortal heart could not deny Éowyn's presence or the magnetic pull that bound them. He had been raised among the elves, but he was still a man, subject to the frailties and passions of humankind. As dawn approached, they parted in silence, each resolute in the decision to stand side by side in the last confrontation. The host of the West was but a fraction of Mordor's might, and every soldier who marched felt in their bones that they trod a path of near-certain sacrifice. Still they marched, and Éowyn rode with them, arm wrapped in bandages beneath her armor, heart beating fiercely with a love that gave her more courage than she had ever known. At the Black Gate, they found themselves beset by innumerable orcs, trolls, and beasts. Aragorn, bearing Andúril, fought at the forefront, a beacon of defiance. Éowyn was never far from him, the bright flash of her blade a testament to the unwavering spirit of Rohan's shield maidens. Their eyes met in fleeting moments amid the chaos, and each time it was as though they renewed an unspoken vow, that if they must die, they would die free, having chosen each other in this final hour. And then the eagles came, and the ground trembled, and the burden of the One Ring was cast into the molten heart of Mount Doom. The Tower of Barad-dûr crumbled, the armies of Mordor scattered and were undone. A roar went up that shook the earth to its core, a cacophony of terror and sudden release. In that moment of cataclysmic change, Aragorn seized Éowyn's hand, and for a blink of time in the middle of that devastated battlefield, they were still. The clouds broke, revealing a sun so bright it seemed to wash the horrors away. For a heartbeat, it felt like the birth of a new world. Days passed in a haze of relief and mourning for the countless dead. The heirs of Gondor and Rohan returned to Minas Tirith in triumph, but also in sorrow for those lost. Among them was Éomer, now king of Rohan, who had witnessed the closeness that had blossomed between his sister and Aragorn. It gave him pause, for he remembered full well that Aragorn was fated to wed the daughter of Elrond. Yet how could anyone begrudge Éowyn a measure of joy after her monumental deeds in war? As the city prepared to crown Aragorn, tensions quietly simmered. Diplomats and messengers came from the north, from Elrond and Galadriel. All had heard of the final victory and the rise of the new king. Some whispered among themselves, half in dismay, half in curiosity. Did the King Elisar still stand by his troth to the Evenstar? Were wedding bells soon to ring for the union of men and elves, heralding a new age of alliance? And yet, King Elisar was not so free as the rumors suggested. His heart was in tumult. One evening he stood upon the ramparts of Minas Tirith, gazing westward, lost in thought. Éowyn found him there, garbed in a simple white gown, her bandaged arm in a sling. The two had scarcely stolen a moment alone since the battle, for duties pressed upon them like an unrelenting tide. But here, under the quiet hush of the night sky, there was no barrier of ceremony or watchers. He turned at her approach, a faint smile flickering on his lips. "My lady," he said softly. "You have been avoiding me," she replied gently, yet without accusation. He sighed. "I have. There is much I must consider. My vow to Arwen is not something lightly set aside. I owe her more than words can convey. She chose mortality for me, surrendered her elven inheritance. How can I betray that devotion?" "It is not a simple matter," Éowyn conceded. She rested her free hand on the cold stone of the rampart. "I cannot pretend to know the bond between you and the Evenstar, but war changes the course of hearts as well as of realms. Would you enter your kingship divided, unsure?" He looked at her, conflict plain in his eyes. "I only know that when I thought all was lost, it was the thought of you, wounded yet defiant in life, that lent me strength to keep going. I had never expected that." She bowed her head, uncertain if she should rejoice or despair. "I do not wish to take anything that is not mine by right, but I also cannot deny that I love you, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Should you ask me to step aside, I will, for I would not be the cause of your undoing or the fracturing of alliances. But if you ask me to stay—" He placed a hand over hers, the warmth of his touch banishing her tremors. "Let us not speak rashly tonight. I will soon meet with Elrond, who travels hither with Arwen. My choice must be made with the fullness of honor. But in my heart—" He faltered, unable to voice the tangle of devotion and guilt that beset him. Tears welled in Éowyn's eyes, but she nodded, offering a small, brave smile. "Very well, King of Gondor. I shall wait upon your decision." Then came the day of Aragorn's coronation. Trumpets sounded through the city, and the populace lined the streets, cheering as the king ascended the steps to the citadel. There, Gandalf placed the winged crown upon Aragorn's head, and the people hailed him as Elisar, the Elfstone, the long-awaited return of the line of Elendil. Afterward, when the festivities spread throughout the city, the most distinguished guests gathered in the high courts. There among them stood Éomer, Faramir, who now served as steward, Legolas, Gimli, and many others of note. Eventually, Arwen arrived, radiant in an elven gown that shimmered with a soft luminescence. She was not alone. Elrond and other elves of Rivendell accompanied her. A hush descended when Arwen approached the king. Ages of song and prophecy had pointed to this moment. The reuniting of the two kindreds, the dawn of a new era under the mortal king who had proven his worth. She bowed her head in solemn respect, and her voice was as a silver bell. "Long have we awaited this day, Estel. The darkness is lifted, and the new age begins. I have come to fulfill the promise we made beneath the golden leaves of Lothlorien, when I chose a mortal life and you pledged your heart to me." All eyes turned to Aragorn, who stood regal yet torn. He could sense Éowyn's presence at the edge of the gathering, her heart no doubt pounding. The silence stretched like a taut bowstring. He reached out, gently taking Arwen's hand, and the crowd let out a soft murmur of anticipation. Then he spoke, his words careful. "My lady, I have not forgotten the choice you made or the sacrifice that it entailed. Your love has been a guiding star to me in many dark nights. Yet the tides of war have led us to uncharted shores. Though I stand before you now as king, I cannot stand before you in peace, for my heart is divided." A tremor passed through the onlookers. Elrond's stern face flickered with something akin to dread. Aragorn paused, sensing a swirl of anguish from Arwen, sorrow from Éowyn, and the startled confusion of the entire court. "It is to my shame that I must confess," he continued, voice trembling. "In the crucible of war, my heart turned toward another, Éowyn of Rohan, who fought bravely and risked her life time and again. She saved me as I saved her. In doing so, we forged a bond one never foresaw, but cannot deny." Collective gasp arose. Arwen's eyes glistened, and she slid her hand from his. "Then it would appear my choice has cost me dearly," she said, her voice taut with emotion. "Estel, I pledge to bind my fate to yours, to forsake the undying West and stand with you as a mortal woman. If you will not have me as your queen, what then remains to me? What becomes of the choice I made?" The courtyard fell into a stunned hush. Even the breeze seemed to stop, as if the entire world held its breath. Gandalf watched with sorrowful eyes, understanding how the hearts of men and elves could be rent asunder by so simple a thing as love. Éowyn, feeling the weight of countless gazes upon her, stepped forward. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes luminous with unshed tears. She knelt, head bowed. "My Lady Arwen," she began, voice low, "it was never my intent to rob you of what you hold dear. The war cast us into strange circumstances. If my presence here brings you only grief, I will depart, to dwell in the house of my brother, never to trouble you again. For it was your courage and sacrifice that gave Aragorn hope through many trials, and I would not repay that with sorrow." Yet Aragorn raised her gently to her feet, turning to Arwen. "I ask your forgiveness, even Star, though I know it may be beyond my deserving. My love for you has shaped me since my youth, but I can no longer abide by that vow while my heart belongs here. If I have betrayed you, know that it was not by intention, but by the unpredictable turning of destiny in these final battles. You too are free to choose. Should you depart these shores with your kin, I would not begrudge you the immortality that is rightfully yours. I offer you my eternal gratitude and regret." Tears glinted on Arwen's cheeks. Elrond stood in silent anguish. At last, Arwen raised her chin, the timeless grace of the Eldar shining in her eyes. "If this is your will, and if your love has truly shifted, then my choice must be weighed anew. My father, perhaps, will allow me passage to the west, but I do this in heartbreak, for I loved you more than life itself, Estel." With these words, she bowed her head in acceptance. Elrond moved to place a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder, sorrow etched in his features. Then, with unearthly composure, Arwen turned from Aragorn, walked quietly from the courtyard, and the dais of onlookers parted to let her pass. For a moment, a hush reigned deeper than any spell. Aragorn inhaled, grief warring with relief, for though his heart now turned to Éowyn, the cost was not slight. That night, while Minas Tirith slept in both celebration and confusion, Éowyn found Aragorn alone in the citadel's private garden. He was pacing, weariness etched into his face. She approached with tentative steps. "I heard what happened. The entire court echoes with rumors. You have made a choice that may undo centuries of alliances. The elves will depart, and many blame me for the part one played." Aragorn turned, took her hand in his, and drew her close. "It was my choice alone," he whispered. "I am no longer a ranger, but a king, and kings must stand by their deeds. My heart is mortal, and in this mortal world, I have chosen you. If it costs me the friendship of the Eldar, that is my burden to bear. I only hope I am worthy of the sacrifice Arwen has made." Éowyn leaned against him, allowing a moment of closeness. Let your actions in the days to come speak for themselves. You have shown mercy, courage, and wisdom. In time, perhaps even the elves will acknowledge your choice, though they may never approve. You, at least, will not reign with a divided soul." He pressed a soft kiss to her brow, and for a fleeting instant, the burdens of war and prophecy melted away, replaced by the warmth of newfound love. Then, at last, they parted. The days and weeks that followed were tumultuous. Word spread throughout the realms. The king had forsaken his elven betrothal and pledged himself to the White Lady of Rohan. Some found this shocking, for the prophecy of Elendil's heir often spoke of a union with the Evenstar, bridging the fates of elves and men. Others, particularly among men, found a strange joy in it, a symbol that this was the age of man, and that the king's bride should be mortal, one who had proven her mettle in the war against Sauron. Many in Rohan rejoiced, for Éowyn was dear to them. Ymir supported his sister's happiness, though he worried for the rift that might grow between Gondor and the elves. Still, he saw the devotion between Éowyn and Aragorn and could not bring himself to cast a shadow upon it. A season passed, marked by the rebuilding of the city and the healing of the lands scarred by war. The steward, Faramir, quietly respected Éowyn's decision, though he had once glimpsed her in the houses of healing and felt a stirring in his own heart. Yet he knew from her eyes that her heart was set on the king. Though it saddened him, he was a man of generosity and wisdom. He congratulated them with sincerity and used his position to quell tensions among those who whispered of ill omens. Then came the day of the betrothal ceremony. It was less grand than the coronation, for the city was still recovering and the memory of Arwen's departure lay upon many. Still, a gentle light touched the hearts of those gathered. The ceremony was held in the court of the fountain. Éowyn wore a gown of white and silver, her golden hair unbound, a simple circlet upon her brow. Aragorn stood before her, clad in royal raiment embroidered with the emblem of the White Tree, and Dural at his side. Gandalf presided over the solemn vow, while Legolas and Gimli served as witnesses, each representing the bonds of friendship that had carried them through the darkest trials. When Aragorn spoke the words that pledged his life and realm to Éowyn, his voice was steady, though his eyes shone with unshed tears, tears of release and resolution. Éowyn's voice trembled only slightly as she bound herself to him, to share his victories and burdens, to stand beside him in the days of peace that she had dreamed of. A hush fell as their voices united in the final vow, and Gandalf pronounced them betrothed in the sight of Eru, the One. A gentle breeze stirred through the courtyard, causing the white tree's newly unfurling leaves to rustle. Some later said it was a sign, perhaps of acceptance from the divine powers that governed Middle-earth, or merely a comforting wind. In the weeks that followed, the wedding itself took place in equal solemnity. Ymir, with a mixture of pride and melancholy, gave Éowyn's hand to Aragorn, the king of Gondor. The Rohirrim who had traveled to the city sang songs in the old tongue, praising the union of their lady with the legendary heir of Elendil. The Gondorians, many of whom had been uncertain at first, began to see hope in this marriage, a sign that the House of Yorl and the House of Telkentar were now entwined, forging a stronger alliance between the two greatest realms of men. The feast that followed was modest by the standards of ages past. There was no endless extravagance, but it was rich in companionship, laughter, and genuine gratitude for life after so much death. In time, Éowyn assumed her duties as queen of the reunited kingdom. The days were not always easy. There were politics to navigate, distant provinces to placate, and the lingering question of how the elves would receive this new order. It was said that Elrond, though grieved by his daughter's sorrow, bore no ill will toward men. He departed across the sea, taking Arwen with him after it became clear that her time in Middle-earth was marred by heartbreak. Some tales mention that she lingered briefly in Lorien, wandering the now silent glades where she and Aragorn had once dreamed of an unbreakable future. It is rumored that she finally sailed from the Grey Havens, resigned to the loss of her mortal beloved, leaving behind a faint echo of her once brilliant light. Aragorn, for his part, grieved that he could not offer Arwen what they had once envisioned, but he found solace in Éowyn's strength. She was a queen both compassionate and steadfast, well loved by the people. She established new orders of healing, championed the farmers and stonemasons needed to rebuild the war-torn lands, and rode often with the Rohirrim who guarded the White City's outer regions. Beside Aragorn, she offered counsel shaped by her direct experiences on the battlefield and her unwavering devotion to the well-being of the common folk. The two shared nights of quiet conversation, recalling the fellowship of the war, the memories of fallen friends, and the joys and perils of a kingdom rising from ruin. Their love, tested by the burdens of the crown, only deepened. If quarrels arose, they met them as warriors meet an enemy, with honesty and resolution. Over time, they established a stability that had long eluded Gondor. Diplomats from far lands, Harad, Run, and beyond, arrived to treat with a realm now guided by a king who had proven his prowess in war but also his capacity for mercy. And the queen with eyes like golden fire and a sword arm that had felled the Witch King became legend in her own right. When at last a child was born to them, a boy in the early spring of the next year, the city erupted in celebration. They named him Eldarion in partial homage to the paternal lineage, but also in subtle acknowledgement of the elf blood that might have been. He had Éowyn's steady gaze and something of Aragorn's noble brow. With the child came renewed hope, a future unburdened by the ancient shadow that had threatened to consume Middle-earth. Over time, more children followed, some inheriting Éowyn's golden hair, others Aragorn's dark locks, all raised with the stories of the War of the Ring and the forging of a new age. And what of Faramir, who, in the original telling, found love with Éowyn? He served faithfully as steward of Gondor, forging a friendship with Éowyn that was akin to that of siblings who deeply respected one another. In this alternate tapestry, he eventually wed a noble lady of Dol Amroth, forging ties with Prince Imrahil's line. His wife was known for her gentle wisdom, and together they oversaw the transformation of Ithilien into a garden of flowers and a haven for those seeking refuge from the scars of war. As the years turned into decades, and the fellowship of old companions took their separate paths, the legends of the war remained. Minstrels sang of the courageous Rohirrim, the cunning hobbits who destroyed the ring, the dwarves and elves who set aside ancient grudges to fight a common foe, and the king whose love changed the course of prophecy. Deep in the libraries of Minas Tirith, scholars sometimes debated the shift in fate that had occurred. Was the prophecy of Elendil's heir incomplete, or had mortal choice simply woven a new pattern in the loom of destiny? None could say for certain. Even Gandalf, when pressed, would only smile enigmatically, as if acknowledging that free will is the final secret of Arda. In Rohan, the songs told of Éowyn no longer just the White Lady of Rohan, but the Queen of Gondor who had once stood alone against the Lord of the Nazgul. They sang, too, of her devotion to Aragorn, how she had fought for the freedom of the Mark and for a place in the world that would not confine her to the shadows. Riders at Adoras would toast her name, proud that one of their own now shared the high seat with the king in the White City. And those who visited the Golden Hall might still see, from time to time, a flash of gold in the sunlight, as Éowyn returned to Rohan to visit her brother or to ride across the open plains that she loved so well. It is said that on certain mornings, when Éowyn rose before the dawn, she would gaze across the Pelennor fields from the walls of Minas Tirith and recall that moment when she stood against the Witch King, alone and yet unyielding. She remembered the hush that followed, when Aragorn found her among the wounded, how his tears had fallen upon her as he called her back from darkness. There was pain there, but also the root of something beautiful, a bond formed in the midst of chaos and sealed in the quiet chambers of the houses of healing. The memory never left her, and though she carried regrets for any hurt caused to Arwen or to others, she could not resent the path fate had taken. For in this life, one must seize the blessings that arrive, even if they come at unexpected times and costs. Thus the reunited kingdom stood in unity, led by a king and queen who had tasted both despair and triumph. Though Arwen's departure left a lingering sense of loss that would never be fully mended, the age of men blossomed, unclouded by the shadow of Sauron. Over many years, Aragorn and Éowyn grew old together, experiencing the grief of mortality but also its profound sweetness. Perhaps in their final days, they leaned upon each other's strength as they had on that battlefield long ago, hand in hand, hearts entwined. When Aragorn's time eventually came, he laid himself down with dignity, relinquishing the crown, and Éowyn, by then aged but still proud, said her farewell with a grace reminiscent of queens of old. She followed him soon after, departing this world of strife and beauty with a sigh and a final whisper of his name. Their children carried on the legacy of the reunited kingdom, forging alliances with dwarves, men, and the remaining elves who still tarried in Middle-earth. Their union, once controversial and fraught with pain, became legendary, a testament to the unpredictable but not unmerciful ways of fate. And in the west, perhaps on the distant shores of Valinor, a fair elven maiden once known as the Evenstar walked the pristine beaches. She might occasionally pause to look eastward, remembering a mortal man called Estel, and the mortal woman whose spirit proved as radiant as the sunlit plains of Rohan. Though her heartbreak was deep, time in those undying lands had its own healing properties. She may have found a measure of peace among her kin, carrying with her the knowledge that she had played her part in the final defeat of Sauron, even if the mortal life she had chosen was lost to her in the end. In that far land, her song rose like a lament, sweet but tinged with sorrow, the memory of what might have been, now mingled with acceptance. So ends the speculation of that alternate path, woven from the threads of possibility that lay dormant in the tapestry of the Third Age. Was it a better fate or a worse one than the tale known by most? None can say. It remains, as all might-have-beens do, in the realm of lore and wonder, a quiet echo in the halls of story where mortals and immortals both strive to find their rightful place, guided by love, duty, and the uncharted courses of the heart. If you wander to Minas Tirith in later ages and stand by the White Tree, you might recall this tale of the king who found love under mortal sun, and the shield maiden who earned her seat beside him. And perhaps, in the rustling of leaves, you will hear the faint echoes of songs telling of Éowyn's fierce courage and Aragorn's fateful choice, reminding us that even in the greatest wars and the grandest prophecies, the human heart carries a power beyond reckoning.